At least 78 people dead and 4,000 injured in a huge explosion in the Lebanese capital, Beirut.
The blast, which shook the entire city, began with a fire at a warehouse which housed thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate.
We'll be live in Beirut throughout the morning with the latest on the desperate search for more survivors.
It was to blame. This report from Sean Dilley contains some distressing scenes.
It was a catastrophic explosion.
What?
The blast was heard 150 miles away. Another view from moments earlier shows a fire in Beirut port. Authorities say the flashes were caused by fireworks. But then, as the sound of the explosion rang out across the city, windows smashed and buildings were destroyed. From the streets, Beirut could only watch as the carnage unfolded. Lebanon's president has announced 3 days mourning and promised to release 100 billion lira, or £50.5 million of emergency funds. Officials say highly explosive materials, believed to be ammonium nitrate, stored in a warehouse for up to 6 years, caused the explosion. They say they're investigating what ignited it. In the meantime, authorities say those responsible will face the maximum possible punishment. Sean Dilley, BBC News.
It says one thing, the next minute the toll would be much higher. As you said, the scale is massive of this explosion. The explosion was felt in several kilometers away, as it was experienced as an earthquake. I was quite far away, about 10 kilometers. What I felt to begin with was an earthquake, what felt to me like an earthquake, and then that was followed by an incredibly loud blast. And that was quite a distance away from the site of the explosion. People closer, obviously their homes, the contents of this blast. Unfortunately, the toll is quite likely to rise. And again, now one of the main questions that's being asked is how come all that material was just sitting there for 6 years in a warehouse at the port of Beirut, but also other questions such as what's the country going to do without a port where most of its imports come through while it faces economic freefall.
Rami, we're looking at the live images this morning, and you do get a sense of the devastation just at the scene of the explosion itself, with just a trail of smoke emerging from the rubble around there. Many of the injuries we know now were caused by glass shattering on buildings, as you described, many miles away. Can you give us a sense of what that was like for people?
Well, I tried to get close to the site of the explosion yesterday, and the highway leading from the north towards the capital was basically a blanket of shattered glass and rubble. Even the lucky ones who weren't wounded, how are they going to rebuild their homes at a time, once again, of economic freefall, when the national currency is in collapse? People's purchasing power has been decimated over the past few months. Material like glass, wood, everything you think of when you think of basic reconstruction stuff, prices are going through the roof. So really, I mean, there's never a good time for such terror to strike any city, but for Beirut, you can hardly imagine a worse time than this.
Rami, we heard stories from those who were caught up quite close to the explosions of vehicles being lifted off the ground and thrown some distance. And also, as you mentioned, the infrastructure to office buildings.
Just after 6 p.m. local time on Tuesday, the 4th of August, an explosion ripped through Beirut's port. People in Lebanon's capital had earlier spotted a large fire at the port, billowing dark smoke into the air. There were reports that a warehouse containing fireworks had caught fire. And several videos of the scene showed coloured flashes in the flames. Videos from the scene suggest there was one smaller explosion. And then roughly 30 seconds later, this enormous shock. The blast struck with the force of a 3.5 magnitude earthquake. This was the aftermath. Windows shattered in buildings across the city and damaged cars on the roads near the port. This is where the explosion happened. 4 kilometers away, in the St. Maroun church, a priest and his congregation were taking part in Mass. The explosion was caught on camera 11 kilometers away in the Dabia Marina. The blast was so big that it was heard from the mountains. This video from the town of Brumana, 15 kilometers away, shows how far the shockwave reached. It was even heard and felt as far away as Cyprus, more than 125 miles across the Mediterranean. Aerial shots show the scale of the destruction of the port. It reportedly housed 85% of Lebanon's supply of grain, which was a strategic food reserve in a country crippled by economic meltdown. You can see the impact on the Beirut port silos building before and after the explosion. Surrounding the silos were corrugated iron and steel structures that have mostly been destroyed. These satellite images reveal the extent of the damage. This crater was once a warehouse. Now it's underwater. The colossal force was caused by the explosion of 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, a highly reactive chemical which was being stored unsafely in a hangar on the port. Lebanon's Prime Minister Hassan Diab has promised that those
reports of people trapped under the rubble. The cause of the blast is not yet known. It's caused widespread damage and appears to be centered on the city's port area. It is the wave, the blast wave has turned cars upside down. Absolute devastation in the Lebanese capital. Sadly, a country that is used to explosions, but this is of an entire different magnitude altogether. I'm joined here in the studio by my colleague, Joel Adalroy, to talk about this.
You can see what appears to be flashes inside those clouds, and what we're hearing from some of the state media reports is this could have been involved, there could have been fireworks involved. There's some suggestion that it may have taken place in an area where fireworks were stored. But of course, all of this is conjecture. It has only happened in the last half hour, and we're still just trying to find out what's going on there. And also, we have no idea how many people may or may not be injured in this, but an explosion of that magnitude, you would have to assume that there has to be somebody has been hurt as a result of this.
And as you rightly point out, Joel, we can't rule anything out at this point. It does appear that the blast happened in the port area of the Lebanese capital. Some are presuming that this could have been an industrial accident. Again, I want to caution our viewers as well. We just don't know yet. This is still a very fluid situation. And I want to point out that you're watching live pictures from the area. I mean, an absolute massive explosion. And it comes just at such a terrible time for the country. Its economy in doldrums, protests happening since months. And, well, we just are left to wonder what's going on in the minds of the Lebanese as, again, sadly, they have to deal with this explosion.
So some more of what we're hearing from people on social media who were there in the city. There may have been at least 2 explosions that have been heard across the city. We know that the blast knocked windows out as far as 10 kilometers away from the area where it happened, which again was in the port district of the city. So 10 kilometers away, people's windows were broken, and we can see cars overturned on the road, and it's just sending plumes of smoke up into the sky. And as you said, Leila, this is a city that's certainly known its share of trouble, and you would expect that the people there, well, look at these images. They're just really quite incredible, aren't they?
Billowing smoke, billowing there from what we presume.
100 people have been killed, including 1 Australian, with around 4,000 others injured. The scale of the explosion is just astonishing. Buildings were destroyed far from the port where the blast was centred, and the damage is up to 10 kilometres away, meaning the whole city was affected. The blast was even heard by people in Cyprus, 200 kilometres off the coast. It's devastating for a country already in the grips of an economic crisis. Middle East correspondent Eric Twarchek reports, and a warning, some viewers may find this story distressing.
The blast at the Lebanese capital's port struck with the force of an earthquake. What? People filming a warehouse fire were suddenly knocked off their feet by a massive explosion.
Is that a bomb? Oh my God! Oh my God!
Flashes were seen in the fire, then something much bigger ignited, sending up a mushroom cloud and pushing a blast wave across the city. This priest was in the middle of a service. Windows kilometres away from the site were blown out. Balconies collapsed.
What happened?
And on the streets, there was chaos. Several thousand people have been injured. Lebanese officials say the blast was caused by a fire at a warehouse where confiscated chemicals were stored. The Interior Minister said it was ammonium nitrate, used for fertiliser or explosives. Thousands of tonnes had been there since 2014. The damage to the port is huge. The governor at the scene said he was looking for a team of firefighters who'd disappeared in the explosion.
It's completely destroyed. It's going to be very, very difficult to get it operational again in a short time. And the country's main grain elevator is the building next to the site of the blast, and that's been destroyed as well. So there's concerns that in a month or so, Lebanon's going to run out of wheat. It's going to be difficult to import more wheat at a time when it was already struggling because of a currency crisis to get food into the country. The number of businesses and homes that have been destroyed by this blast as well means it's going to be really, really difficult for Lebanese at a time when they simply didn't have any cash to function, you know. And this is the fear, is that Lebanon was teetering on the edge of serious instability before.
And there you can see the enormity of what appears to be a secondary explosion. Whether that was, it could well be the first explosion, because it may have been a fire just before it, but I'm just getting reports actually that there was a fire first and then that enormous explosion, which you just show viewers. And this is the explosion from a different angle, and again it just shows how whether that's the first explosion or the second explosion is not clear, but that is what the authorities or state media says is a fireworks warehouse, and you can see actually firecrackers or some sort of subsidiary explosions going on there. But those pictures just in, and there another explosion as well. So
of the aftermath of those two separate explosions, and the latest casualty reports just coming into us here at BBC News say that there could be several hundred people who have been injured and who've been taken to hospitals in the city. The head of the Lebanese Red Cross is saying that there's no exact figure of how many people are injured, but many are still trapped in their homes within the area of the blast. Some people are being rescued by boat. There's one source in Beirut saying that they are treating in one hospital more than 500 injuries, and they can't take any more casualties. Many of the operations are taking place in that hospital, and the hospital is appealing for blood donations. Let's get this report now from our correspondent James Robbins.
A massive explosion sent shockwaves tearing through the Lebanese capital. The blast happened in the port area. It looks as if the first explosion was followed by another much larger one, which swept through many nearby buildings. Lebanon's health minister said there'd been many injuries and widespread damage.
The building is about to collapse. Just a few minutes after there was like big explosion, that all the doors in my flat went open, and we started trying to call each other, check on people. And you know, the phone network was down, and immediately after we heard that there was the explosion that hit the area of the Beirut port. Many buildings around that area had their windows shattered, you know, some like huge damage there. And of course the government is saying that there are many casualties and the hospitals are filled up with people. So so far we're not able to tell what are the causes. The government is saying that the explosion took place at the port at an explosives warehouse, but it's hard to tell at the moment what are the real causes behind this big explosion. It certainly shook the whole city. Many people heard it, you know, from miles away from the city, and it was like really something of a kind that nobody felt before. It reminded people of what happened in 2005, where there was a big explosion that took the life of former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri.
You can see the nightscape in Beirut, and flames and smoke and carnage after that enormous explosion. It seems there were two explosions, but one, as we saw earlier, was particularly massive. Now, the US State Department says it's following closely the reports of the explosion. It's standing ready to offer all possible assistance, says the US State Department. The latest casualty figures, well, there aren't any detailed casualty figures, but the head of the Lebanese Red Cross is talking about hundreds of people having been taken to hospitals in the city, and many remaining trapped in their homes that have been damaged by the blast. And also we're hearing reports of at least 10 people having been killed. Clearly that death toll may rise.